Hi students, welcome to lesson number 5, Objectivity versus Subjectivity. To know reality through research requires rigour. This raises issues that need to be examined with any research, that of the degree of subjectivity that is involved in most social sciences, research based on the notion that neither the subject nor the researcher can be completely objective. Objectivity is the first condition of research. Objectivity means basing conclusion on facts without any bias and value judgment. The conclusion should be independent of one's personal beliefs, likes, dislikes and hopes. One, to study the meaning of objectivity. 2, to know the importance of objectivity. 3, to examine the objectivity and subjectivity. Objectivity means the willingness and ability to examine evidence dispassionately. Objectivity is sine qua non of scientific method. Both the data and inference drawn from their analysis must be free from bias and prejudices. According to Middle, research has an inbuilt self-cleaning and self-healing capacity. Facts kick and do so even though with some delay when data are first assembled under categories that corresponds to the biased approach applied but are inadequate to reality. Objectivity is personal neutrality. It allows the facts to speak for themselves and not to be influenced by the personal values and biases of the researcher. It can also be interpreted as mind independent because it is information that is not being altered based on an opinion. That is the proof that reality is mind independent. For example, when looking at a painting, a person would use objectivity to describe the texture, color and form. These are all facts that are common and cannot be changed. Subjectivity is judgment based on individual personal impressions and feelings and opinions rather than external facts. This can be considered the mind dependent because one is not using a fact, they are using their personal opinion. For example, if your favorite color is blue, then you are more likely to buy a blue sweater versus a purple sweater. A belief that objectivity exists in some ways and also does not exist in others. When doing a social research experiment, it is good to have unbiased results because it will create a more accurate study. However, most of the time this is impossible to do because every person has some kind of subjectivity in them based on their life experiences and opinions. So, in order to research a topic, social researchers turn to experiments, surveys, participant observations and the use of existing sources as guides in research methods. By having a variety of ways to get results, social researchers can use these methods to draw conclusions on a certain topic. Positivists attempt to ensure that the conditions under which their research is conducted can be controlled and replicated. Conversely, in the social sciences, it can be difficult to achieve such conditions if so desirable. There are inherent difficulties with research in social science based on the fact that researchers already share their world with those they are investigating and can only interpret, understand and make sense of their findings from their own frame of reference. Duplication or replication of a research study could possibly lead to different results if the principal researcher was repeating the same investigations using different categorizations or grading of variables. Furthermore, alternative results may be identified due to different conditions, timing or interpretations. Therefore, researchers should be mindful that any investigation will have a degree of subjectivity that permits their findings. Objectivity and subjectivity. As objectivity and subjectivity are such a central theme in this chapter, it is worth clarifying the definition of both. The chambers dictionary in defining objectivity uses the phrase exterior to the mind, while the Collins dictionary uses the term independent of the attitudes of any individual. The Oxford Dictionary of English identifies it as not influenced by personal feelings or opinions in considering or representing facts. However, it is the definition of subjectivity which highlights the potential problem when it comes to personal involvement. The Chambers defines subjectivity as influenced by or derived from personal taste or opinion, lacking impartiality. Collins relates the issues of values and how variable they are in the same way. Individual tastes differ, therefore, it can be implied that subjectivity in research relates very closely to the person doing the research, their values and their taste which they bring along with them into their chosen research process. Objectivity, according to be not influenced by personal feelings or opinions when considering facts and representing them, but we cannot escape the knowledge we have in advance that all methods and forms of representation are partial and that the concept of scientific research being objective or value free is questionable. Objectivity, although more rational, should not be linked to certainty and concludes by saying that neither subjectivity nor objectivity has an exclusive stranglehold on truth. The goal of scientific investigation has to be objectivity, but this can only be above criticism if values are kept out. Human thought through understanding cannot be something that can be dismissed because it starts from shared meanings and understanding through the process of rationalization, which is something that we use every day of our lives. When we hear a joke, we can take it in the words with our senses, but we understand it or get the joke with our reason. In this context, it cannot be separated. This may be real reason for natural scientists abandoning the quest for absolute objective knowledge, as it just cannot be achieved. Values are so strong within us, even though we may be unconscious of them, but they do shape the way we look at the world and how we make decisions. The important thing is to attempt to understand and make explicit personal values while at the same time seek to understand the values held by people, organizations or cultures being researched. So, whether quantitative or qualitative methods are being used, whether objectivity is at the foundation of the research or whether subjectivity have been embraced and acknowledged, the conclusion has to be that research accounts can only represent reality. They cannot reproduce it. Let us examine the factors affecting objectivity. In social science research, it is very difficult to achieve objectivity. This difficulty arises out of the adverse influences of 1. Personal prejudices and bias, 2. Value judgment, 3. Ethical dilemma, and 4. Complexity of social phenomena. 1. Personal prejudices and biases. This emanate from habits of thought, temperamental weaknesses, skeptical attitude, wishful thinking, vested interest, etc. Prejudices and biases are like fantasies to believe what is comforting, to believe what is comforting to believe. These make on to believe something without considering evidence, attempt to understand and make explicit personal values while at the same time seek to understand the values held by people, organizations or cultures being researched. So, whether quantitative or qualitative methods are being used, whether objectivity is at the foundation of the research or whether subjectivity have been embraced and acknowledged, the conclusion has to be that research accounts can only represent reality. They cannot reproduce it. 2. Problem related to value arises. Value related problem arises from the social context within which research occurs. A researcher's attitudes towards socio-economic issues are influenced by his values. His judgment is colored by his belongingness and the writer or philosopher who inspired him. the great scientists project their values and views in their theories. For example, the Fabian socialism of George Bernard Shaw and Gandhi's philosophy of limiting wants and trusteeship, Bertrand Russell's power interpretation of social order, Karl Marx's proletarian interpretation of society. According to Gunnar Myrdal, value premises are needed even in the theoretical stage of establishing knowledge about facts and factual relations. A view is impossible except from a viewpoint for logical reasons. Valuations are always implied in our search for truth. 3. Personal preconceptions. It has a distorting effect on the data, but are also highly insidious because they are the subtle. So, implicit deeply noted that it is difficult for us to discern them in ourselves or when they are called to our attention, to avoid rationalizing them instead of examining them objectively. 4. Ethical dilemmas. This arises out of researchers' relations with other participants in the research process. There are 4 types of interpersonal relations that pose potential ethical dilemmas. A. Relations with those sponsoring the research. B. Relations with those permitting access to sources of data. C. Relations with the investigators connected with the project. And D. Relations with research subject themselves. 5. Social phenomena. They are too complex for easy comprehension and too vast to provide precise verifiable knowledge. A physical scientist is confined to the 4 walls of laboratory and he cannot conduct controlled experimentation. On the other hand, laboratory of social scientists is as vast as the entire society and it is not amenable for controllers' experimentation. Although strict objectivity is next to impossibility, it is possible only for a reflective researcher of social life to attain reasonable level of objectivity consistent with logical and systematic thinking. Research in social science requires the collection of data in order to understand a phenomena. This can be done in a number of ways and will depend on the state of existing knowledge of the topic area. The researcher can explore a little known issue. The researcher has an idea or has observed something and seeks to understand more about it, that is the exploratory research. Connect ideas to understand the relations between the different aspects of an issue, that is explain what is going on, explanatory research. Describe what is happening in more detail and expand the initial understanding, explicatory or descriptive research. Exploratory research is often done through observation and other methods such as interviews or surveys that allow the researcher to gather preliminary information. Explanatory research, on the other hand, generally tests hypotheses about cause and effect relationship. Hypotheses are statements developed by the researcher that will be tested during the research. The distinction between exploratory and explanatory research is linked to the distinction between inductive and deductive research. Explanatory research tends to be deductive and exploratory research tends to be inductive. This is not always the case, but for simplicity we shall not explore exceptions here. The descriptive research may support an explanatory or exploratory study. On its own, descriptive research is not sufficient for an academic project. Academic research is aimed at progressing current knowledge. The perspective taken by the researcher also depends on whether the researcher believes that there is an objective world out there that can be objectively known. For example, profit can be viewed as an objective measure of business performance. Alternatively, the researcher may believe that concepts such as culture, motivation, leadership, performance results from human categorization of the world and that their meaning can change depending on the circumstances. For example, performance can mean different things to different people. For one, it may refer to a hard measure such as levels of scales. For another, it may include good relationship with customers. According to this later view, a researcher can only take a subjective perspective because the nature of these concepts is the result of human process. Subjective in generally refers to the subjective experiences of research participants and to the fact that the researcher's perspective is embedded within the research process, rather than seen as fully detached from it. On the other hand, objective research claims to describe a true and correct reality which is independent of those involved in the research process. Although this is a simplified view of way in which research can be approached, it is an important distinction to think about. Whether you think about your research topic in objective or subjective terms will determine the development of the research questions, the type of data collected, the methods of data collection and analysis you adopt and the conclusions that you draw. Subjective research is generally referred to as phenomenological research. This is because it is concerned with the study of experiences from the perspective of an individual and emphasizes the importance of personal perspectives and interpretations. Subjective research is generally based on data derived from observations of events as they take place or from unstructured or semi-structured interviews. In unstructured interviews, the questions emerged from the discussion between the interviewer and the interviewee. In semi-structured interviews, the interviewer prepares an outline of the interview topics or general questions, adding more as needs emerged during the interview. The structured interviews include the full list of questions. The interviewers do not deviate from this list. Subjective research can also be based on examinations of documents. The researcher will attribute personal interpretations of the experiences and phenomena during the process of both collecting and analyzing data. This approach is also referred to as the interpretive research, that in order to understand and explain specific management and HR situations, one need to focus on the viewpoints, experiences, feelings and interpretations of the people involved in the specific situation. Conversely, objective research tends to be modeled on the methods of natural sciences such as experiments or large-scale surveys. Objective research seeks to establish law-like generalizations which can be applied to the same phenomena in different contexts. This perspective, which privileges objectivity, is called positivism and is based on data that can be subject to statistical analysis and generalization. Positivist researchers use quantitative methodologies which are based on measurement and numbers to collect and analyze data, and interpretivists are more concerned with language and other forms of qualitative data which are based on words or images. Having said that, researchers using objectivist and positivist assumptions sometimes use qualitative data, while interpretivists sometimes use quantitative data. The key is to understand the perspective you intend to adopt and realize the limitations and opportunities it offers. Positivism, that is the objective one, regards the world as objectively out there, real and completely separate from human meaning making. 2. Asserts there is only one true objective knowledge that transcends the time and cultural location. 3. Views knowledge as based on facts that are out there in the world waiting to be discovered. 4. Ask of knowledge, is it true? Interpretive, that is the subjective, claims that the only world we can study is a world of meanings and represented in the signs and symbols that people use to think and to communicate. 2. Accepts that there are multiple knowledge and that knowledge is highly contingent on time and cultural location. 3. Views knowledge as constructed through people's meaning making. 4. Asks of knowledge, what does it do? How can it be used by whom? And to what end? Whose interest does it serve? What does it make possible? some degree of objectivity by following some approaches and measures. 1. A researcher must have patience and self-control. He should not be overwhelmed by personal likes and undisciplined imagination and wishful thinking, avoiding prejudging the phenomena under study. 2. A researcher often succumbs to the habit of thinking and personal notions that lead him to presuppose that certain facts are truths. He must have an open mind to subject his research process and interpretations to the critical review of other scientists. Only then corrections can be made. 3. The use of standardized concepts should be precisely defined and used consistently so as to avoid misconceptions and confusion. 4. Appropriate statistical and mathematical techniques of analysis may be used so that they are free from subjective bias. 5. Group research or cooperative research will be more objective than an individual research. Group interaction will reduce the influence of personal bias. 6. In drawing a sample of units of study, random sampling technique may be used as it is free from personal prejudices. To sum up, by considering the notions of objectivity and subjectivity in research within the social sciences, it can be understood that pure objectivity is not something that is achievable, although our research should aim to be as objective as possible. What we bring with us as researchers, the culture and traditions that shape our values, which form our beliefs, that influence of our epistemological stance, are an important and integral part of research, for it helps us to understand our subject. At the same time, it is important to be aware of and acknowledge the role it plays and how it can influence our work. Our research cannot help but contain subjectivity, as we all exist in a continually changing world of experience of which we are the center.